anyway, this is what we're working for with the chapters going forward. And thanks so much to Chad for sourcing this. So I'll start off with reading the first section here, section 182. And from thence we passed into Carlisle city, and on 7th day, the market day, I went up into the market to the cross. The magistrates had threatened and sent their sergeants, and the magistrates' wives said that if I came there, they would pluck the hair off my head, and that the sergeants should take me up. Nevertheless, I obeyed the Lord God and went and stood atop of the cross in the middle of the market, and there declared unto them that the day of the Lord was coming upon all their deceitful ways and doings and deceitful merchandise, and that they were to lay away all, I'm not sure if you pronounce it, cozening, and cheating, and keep to yea and nay, and speak the truth one to another, and spoke the truth to them as I passed along the streets. So I set the truth and the power of God over them. And a multitude of people followed me, and the people being throng, the servants could not get to me, nor the magistrates' wives come at me. So I passed away quietly after I had declared the word of life to the people. And there was a friend led me to his own house, and many people and soldiers came to me, and some Baptists that were bitter contenders, so that one of their deacons, an old man, cried out, the Lord's power being over them. And I set my eyes upon him and spoke sharply to him in the power of the Lord. And he cried, don't pierce me so with thy eyes. Keep thy eyes off me.
And I'm just curious to know what's the footnote A at the bottom. An old man. What?
A's and B's and those small letters like that with their bracketing.
Okay.
When they're
I guess
bracketing
it's
text.
just referring to other parts of the manuscript. Well, never mind.
No, it's from the short journal. SJ is the short journal.
Yeah.
So Nickalls has tried to incorporate things from the short journal into this long version.
Okay.
And sometimes he abbreviates some things, but he incorporates other things. So he's trying to make it a more complete journal. Things that were in the short journal that aren't in the long journal, he wants to put in.
Good. I don't intend us to take time on it. If it were explaining who was the old man at the bottom of the same page, that's fine. I just asked to scroll down, but let's forget it for now. Thanks.
So Chad, this is the long version then, the long journal?
Nickalls is trying to combine two of them.
Okay.
Both.
Okay.
In our extra notes section, I have a whole section on the different journals. One was written earlier, one was written later. We've lost the first few pages of the later manuscripts. So, and it's given different names like Cambridge, that's the later one's called a Cambridge manuscript by some people. So if you check the extra notes section, I'll put a link in the chat as to where that is. It should still be in there.
So I see Bev's hand. Let's hear from Bev.
I actually had a question. I don't understand, and maybe someone has the information about what happened then, but the magistrates don't come, their wives come. And what was their position? Why were they, carrying out the magistrates' wishes here in the, is it because it's the marketplace and only women went? So I'm just wondering what that's all about.
Good question.
You might have to look that up earlier in the journal to find that answer as to why they were so threatened. But obviously, they don't like their husband's power being threatened and their power through them.
Beth?
The thing that hit me in this section is the section where he's talking about their deceitful ways in the marketplace and doings and deceitful merchandise. And I just think of modern corporations. It's the same thing. And it's always gone on. It's this using resources. As soon as we start accumulating, then the fear sets in that we're not going to have enough. And then corporations can use that. And I don't know, it just for me goes back to the nomadic way is you search for food, for the things you need, you don't accumulate, and you leave it to Mother Earth and the divine to give you what you need. And if you don't have enough, you die. And that's just life for all living things. But this whole thing about making us fear and need to accumulate, it's just so fascinating that it's all the same now as it was then.
From Samuel Johnson's dictionary online, which link is in the extra notes. To cousin, from the Scotch dialect codes, to chop or change, whence cousin means to cheat. Because in such traffic there is commonly fraud. To cheat, to trick, defraud. And that's from Samuel Johnson's dictionary, 1755. So it's a little bit closer. It's a little bit closer to our than to our time.
Well, we'll go to David in just a moment. I just wanted to make a comment that I had looked up what the market cross was, and maybe others know of that. But as I understand it, the market cross was where there was a particular place in the village that had been approved by the powers that be as the place that a market could happen, that exchange of money for merchandise could happen. And I just find it rather ironic that they used a cross to symbolize that. So when you think of the true meaning of the cross and Christ and God and everything, there's a bit of a disconnect there. Let's go to David.
Well, what I find highlighted here is one of friends' testimonies that we don't hear about or talk about very much, but that I think has been historically important. And that has to do with integrity. He points to it, Jesus's admonition to say simply, yea, yes or no. Anything beyond that is unhelpful or even evil. But I think that in that time, and maybe I just don't know how it relates to other cultures or other times in English history, but the practice was let the buyer beware. I mean, we have the Latin phrase, which will come to me in a moment. Caveat emptor. So somebody going shopping, you can expect that you're going to have to do some bargaining, that they're going to be asking more than something is worth, whether you call that cheating or just the beginning of an interesting conversation. But it's one reason that Quaker merchants, even in this earliest period, were known for having a fixed price. And parents could send their kids to shop with Quakers and know that they would pay the quoted price and it would be fair. And they wouldn't have to be outmaneuvered by somebody with greater seeming authority or bargaining power. It's the reason that this American company started, early 1900s, maybe late 1800s, which was known as the Oats Trust. They picked the picture of a 18th century Quaker to put on their cereal box and called it Quaker Oats. Now, I don't know how many of us have had to tell people, no, that this company is not owned by the Society of Friends, and no, we don't look like that anymore. But it was to convey the impression of wholesomeness and honesty, which is not to be taken for granted. But it seems to be central to his ministry in the market on this particular day. And maybe that's why he wasn't beaten up or arrested, is because people really did have a common interest, even if they didn't know how to organize for it, to have fair pricing and not be taken advantage of.
Thank you, David. That was really helpful. And Sheila, over to Sheila.
Yeah, the question of cheating in the market, it wasn't just over prices. There was also a tendency to give a lesser weight than what you were supposed to be getting. So they would cheat on the weight of the merchandise. And so that, because Quakers got the reputation of being honest in that respect, and also because of the laws restricting what professions and occupations they could enter, a number of Quakers became rich industrialists, as we all know. I just wanted to add that bit about the cheating on the weights.
Sheila, you mentioned that there were laws restricting what professions, was it Quakers could enter?
Oh, I don't remember I learned it all in history. Various religions couldn't do this and that. I mean, it was a long time before Quakers could become members of parliament. I think the first was John Bright. And they were kept out of the universities, I think, for a long time. There were different laws that affected Catholics. That's one reason why the Jewish community concentrated on financial matters, because other occupations were barred to them. But I don't remember the dates when all this changed. It was a series of laws in different periods of time.
Right. And most of those
Thank
laws
you.
and that trust in Quaker honesty comes after, a fair bit after this period right now in 1653, sorry, which maybe what David's going to say. David, go ahead.
Well, just to elaborate a little bit more on it, I might be repeating, but to go into certain professions, you had to go to the universities of Cambridge or Harvard or Cambridge or Oxford, and Quakers couldn't, because those were set up to prepare people for the Anglican ministry. So they were structurally kept out of maybe medicine, certainly kept out of law. And that's why they did go into other kinds of businesses and got education at different universities and helped build up the regional ones. So there is a kind of what do we say? I mean, creative readjustment there in the face of official discrimination. And you know, there's a lot of studies have been done about Quakers and the economy, and I won't try to summarize any more than that.
And just to make a comment on what jump the queue bit here, Chris. I've heard it said that Quakers were the ones that had the set prices, and so everyone else had to match them because the Quakers were doing it. I haven't verified that in history, so if anyone has counter verification, please let me know. Bev, go ahead.
I'm finding the issue of this bargaining very significant. It's interesting, the synchronicity for me that yesterday a woman came by from Rogers talking about buying her. Anyway, it turned out that she was originally from India and I lived in Delhi for a number of years. And as we were talking, it turned out that her uncle had taken her 2005-ish to the ashram where I had been in the late 70s into the 80s. And it brought back all those memories. And as we're talking now, we were sent to the market, Sarojini Market, to get food for the ashram, as well as for a program that I'm not sure if it was every week or every month, a meal was taken to the parliament to show that you could have a healthy meal of a chapati and soup for a rupee. And at that time, a rupee was about 9 rupees to the dollar. So over those 4 years going to the market, I became very good at bargaining. But it just made me recall now, one time when I was bargaining, I felt that I had underbid and the person had to accept it. These are poor people selling their produce. So I had to make sure that whatever I bought was 70 rupees or less a pound. And it's always stuck with me that I took for the ashram from him. And, it was like cheating him. And it's always stayed with me. And what I'm realizing is that although this is made fun of in so many ways, this bargaining thing, it makes for such a terrible relationship in a community between the people. It's a horrible, horrible thing.
Bev, thank you for sharing from your heart with that story. Very touching.
I see we have Ruth from Coventry, and I know her quite well. Has Ruth attended before? She's from the UK. I see her all over.
Thank you. Yes. Yes. I
Welcome,
have.
welcome, Ruth.
I've got a bit more spare time at the moment, so it's good to be back.
Lovely to have you, Ruth. And I forgot to mention earlier for Elise, who's attending the first time, but if you'd like to put your email address in chat, then I can add you to my mailing list for when we send out the notices of our Friendly Fridays. Bev, I've lost track. Is your hand still up from your previous comment, or did you? Okay, very good. Again, thanks for sharing.
As far as honesty in business, we do have the example of Jesus clearing out the money lenders from the temple outer limits who were there to take advantage of people that were had to make sacrifices in the sacrificial system. I was trying to think of any Old Testament. I'm sure there are Old Testament examples of the prophet maybe chastising people for not being honest in business. Go ahead, Dave.
Well, just on that last point, I think it was because you had to make your offering in the currency that was accepted in the temple. And if people came from outside of Palestine, and there were worshipers of Israel's God who were not Jewish, they were a captive audience. They had they had to make that transaction there at the temple. And it's, you know, maybe some of us have traveled and we take the disadvantageous exchange rate that they give you at the hotel desk rather than go shopping for the best rate. So it was another example of people being over a barrel and being oppressed. And the beginning of Jesus's ministry is his proclamation from the prophet. Let's see, is it Isaiah or Jeremiah? Anyway, when he was given the scroll in his synagogue, and he reads that the Lord has anointed him to bring good news to the poor, and liberation to the oppressed. And so again, these economic dimensions, social justice is there from the beginning of this movement, for which friends said we were primitive Christianity revived. Looking out for the little guy, as my mom would say.
And Jesus has always had that motive, right? Part of his ministry, right? Where he lifts up the Samaritan who were despised and thought of as lesser by the Israelites. And women, he was always affirming women, you know, just over and over in all that he did. We see him subverting some of the even Israelite pride, I guess I'd call it. You know, he was like, in all of Israel, I haven't found such a faith as in this Roman centurion. Like he's kind of goading them almost, you know, in their religious superiority. But also, as you know, all the people that the religious people could deem were evil sinners and born in sin and all these things, the terminology that they use. Jesus is friends with those people and eats and drinks and hangs out with those people, and yet is criticizing those who think that they're super holy in the ways that they think they're super holy, and they're following their tradition instead of knowing God directly, which is a big thing for foxes, knowing and following God directly and being cleansed by God. And so it's just, I've read it before from other ministers that are really moving in the spirit, where the people are saying, don't look at me. Don't put your eyes on me, because they can feel the piercing gaze of God that reads our souls, you know, kind of thing. And they know that they fall short, but they're pretending as religious, anyone in a religious setting, as I use the word. A lot of people we're all wearing masks with each other, right? We're hiding all our inner stuff that might not be aligned with God, and we're afraid. But we're performing. We're putting on this religious performance for each other, and it's not real, and it's not true, and it's not really even a safe environment to be real and true. Most of the time, I can attest for my own walk. And so, yeah, I've seen this before. It's like, don't put your eyes on me. Don't look at me, because sometimes in the spirit, there's this thing that goes on that when you are seeing into somebody by the gift of God, they know that you're seeing into them. Like there's this reciprocal thing where they can sense that they're being seen, and they don't want to be uncovered. But when we walk with God, and as we walk with God, you know, he cleanses us, and he empowers us to be who we really are. so we don't have to put on religious masks, especially not with God. But he enables us to be who we really are and not put on masks with each other to a higher degree than would be normally present. He's so affirming in who we are. He's so accepting. And I think we talked about last time how sometimes when we're in denial about ourselves, that's when God has to be a little bit more harsher with us to wake us up a bit. It's not that he is a harsh being. I don't think, in all my interactions with him, he's extremely gentle and gracious and kind and supportive. But if we're in denial about ourselves, that's when speaking the truth, the power has to happen a bit more, and it does seem a little more harsh. And sometimes, especially as Canadians, we're really programmed in our society to be kind and be nice, which is not the same thing as kind. So sometimes just be nice, be nice, be nice. These nice Canadians, and sometimes the truth, sometimes in setting people free from their own self-deception, sometimes it's love demands that we be a little bit harsh in our presentation of the truth. And, I don't think it's God's desire to be that way. It's just sometimes you have to be cruel to be kind, was a song when I was growing up. But in the wisdom and the leading of God, and not in our own self-righteousness. And the correction in the New Testament is always to be given in the hopes to restore your brother and sister. It's not to think that you're bigger or better. And Jesus, when he's correcting me, which he's done a lot of times, I've never felt like he's talking down to me. Like he's always showing me something so he can lift me up. And sometimes you don't get that in just reading a text-only account. But I remember Fox was in jail and he was writing a letter to the persecutors of the Quakers up north. And he's like, for your sake, please stop persecuting these children of God. Stop laying up for yourself judgment, kind of thing. I'm concerned about you persecutors, and I'm writing to you for your benefit, that hopefully you will stop doing this thing and laying up offenses against God in this way, kind of thing. So it's amazing, that the heart that God gives is his heart. And he is quite concerned about even the worst offender. And he's not there to say, I'm better and you're worse. It's like, no, come join me. Come join me in love, and join me in what is the right way, the better way, and I will empower you in it.
I could make a suggestion. I don't know if the plan is when you get to the end of the journal that you return to the beginning and you just cycle round. Is that what you do, or?
We haven't got there yet, and it's several chapters away, I'm sure. So that might be years.
I think that the letters of George Fox in The Power of the Lord is Over All, they're dated, and I think it would be good to be able to read the portion of the journal and read his letters at the same time, because it gives. I've got the two books, but I just think that because the journal's dated and the letters are dated, it would be nice to have them sort of alongside each other. Maybe not obviously this time, but I think the last time I came, it was Woodfield, Mansfield. So I think it can't be the same reading. It must have been that you read it before. I think it was last year. Yeah, sorry. Anyway, just thought
No.
I'd share that in case it's helpful. But
Yeah, that's an interesting suggestion, and especially in the Old Testament, when if you read the prophets right through, if they're not lined up time wise, sometimes you don't know what they're talking about. But if you have the rest of the history from the Bible lined up chronologically, then you know what they're referring to, and it makes a lot more sense, and it doesn't just sound like a huge pile of condemnation. So you know exactly why he's condemning them. If you know the history alongside. So it is that would be an interesting study to do.
Thank you, Ruth, for that suggestion. Are we ready to move on to the next section?
We do value
Okay.
every voice. So I just before we move on, Elise, I know you're new. You don't want to put you on the spot. You don't have to say anything, but do you have anything to contribute?
Only that I have found my Nickalls edition. So I'm now looking at the same page as y'all are looking at. So that's a good thing. Thank you.
I apologize for not sending the correct page number beforehand.
No, you wouldn't. That wouldn't help me. So because what I have is the complete works of George Fox. So it's very my edition. The editions of the journal are similar to, but not exactly like what we have here with the Nickalls. But I have also this copy of the Nickalls, so I'm now looking at the same copy. That's all. I'm happy to have come to the same page.
And there is an online version of Nickalls for anyone who wants it and doesn't have a paper copy, and wants to read ahead. We do send out this file of the chapter that's marked up into sections so you can follow along. Ginny?
I'm just curious, how do we access the letters of George Fox?
I can send you a link, and they are in the extra notes as well.
Okay, so are they in book form?
Yep.
Okay, what book are they in?
Well, in the works of George Fox, which is what, 7 volumes or 5 volumes?
Oh,
They're included in that. I think they are separate books as well. Elise, can you speak to that?
I only have the works set of multi books, so I don't know anything about how these are available in some other form.
I can send a PDF that's very clear, but David, go ahead.
Larry Kenning has been with us several times, and he and his late wife have been publishers of what is called Quaker Heritage Press. And there's a great deal of those early writings that they had both in print and now online, and very economically priced. So you just might browse the catalog of Quaker Heritage Press.
thank you.
And Larry's part of this group that was here for the last 2 sessions. Anyway, he's part of, his wife or somebody one of his relatives set it up in the first place. So she's passed now last year. So.
And Ruth was showing her copy of her book there. Thank you for that, Ruth. Very good. All right, we've got section 183 then queued up. Sheila, would you be in a position to read?
And you're muted.
Sorry. Okay, so 183, right?
Correct.
And the pastor of the Baptists, a lieutenant, came to me to the abbey with most of his hearers, where I had a meeting and declared the word of life amongst them. And many of the Baptists and soldiers were convinced. And after the meeting was done, the pastor, with a rapier in his hand, came and asked me what must be damned, being a high notionist and a flashy man. And I was moved of a sudden to tell him that which spoke in him was to be damned, which stopped the pastor's mouth, and the witness of God was raised up in him. And I opened to him the state of election and reprobation, so that he said he never heard the like in his life. He also came afterwards to be convinced. And after, I went up to the castle amongst the soldiers, and they beat a drum and called them together. And I turned them to the Lord Jesus Christ, their teacher, and warned them of doing violence to any man, and that they might show forth the Christian's life. And I turned them from the darkness to the light, and from the power of Satan unto God. And I let them see what was their teacher, and what would be their condemnation, and had no opposition, but from the sergeants, who afterwards came to be convinced.
Thank you, Sheila.
Okay.
Let's hear from Bev.
I have a question about the term that he uses, that he came afterwards to be convinced, and he uses that twice. If anyone has insight into what that process is it that they didn't say anything at the time, but later on? I'm just wondering what that kind of conversion aspect, what Fox is trying to say happened within these people.
Great question. David?
My sense is that convince and convincement is pretty much equivalent to conversion, being made aware of one's guilt or inadequacy, but not being stuck there, not, as we might say, wallowing in one's guilt, but being turned to the light. So there's a lot that's carried in this word that has changed over 3 or 4 centuries. Others may add to this. I think, I don't know, I'm not repeating myself. In a different Bible study, I've heard that convincement was like conviction. And we have 2 different meanings, that to be strong in one's convictions, or one can be convicted in a court of law. So there is the sense of condemnation, but also of being converted, change in one's life. And I wish I knew more what it was that this pastor of the Baptist was asking about, what must be damned. He said, well, that which is speaking through you is something that we need to at least be moved away from. But I think we're getting a kind of shorthand summary here and not hearing the whole conversation. But I like how it came out, that they all got converted, except the sergeants, but a little bit later, they did too. Mass conversion, we might say.
David, I'm remembering that from time to time you remind us of the word metanoia. And Henry Jason, when he's been with us, has mentioned that as well. Would you say this is similar, the metanoia, the turning around?
Absolutely right. In the Greek, it implies a 180-degree turn of direction, going an opposite direction of where you were before. So Henry Jason has unpacked that one for me and helped me a whole lot, so that when we hear the word repentance, I mean, that's a King James translation that's carried into the present. And we tend to think of repentance as saying, I'm sorry. And Henry Jason has said, no, in the Greek, it means something that's behavioral rather than verbal. It's not saying, oh, I regret I did it. Well, what are you going to do about it? Let your life be changed, turn around. So those are some of the undergirdings, I think, for what friends were proclaiming in this period. Now, another question is, are we proclaiming truth now, or are we hiding our light under a bushel about inviting people to let their lives be turned around and put under the power of God? That's a different discussion, but it all comes to my mind as I see this power being represented in town after town that he comes to.
Go ahead.
Thank you, David. Jenny?
This isn't the first time that it's taken somebody time to be convinced. And I think it's important that some people did take time. Sometimes it's easy to get caught up in a movement, but only during that time. Of course, most of them did go through a change that stayed with them forever, although some people fell away. But the fact that it took time suggests that he planted the seed there, and it took a little while for it to grow, but it did. And it happened perhaps on his own after the seed had been planted.
For me, and I hopefully I'm not projecting onto the early Quakers, a difference between conversion and convincement in how they saw things, I think, and again, hopefully I'm not projecting, is in this case, you're convinced by God internally. It's an act of the Spirit. And the Spirit shows you your state of anything that's wrong with you, or in your actions or in your heart. And so it's a change of heart, a transformation that comes from God. Whereas maybe some conversions are not so deep as the Spirit, and they're more in your mind and in your intellect. And convincement some people might think that it is an intellectual process, that you're convinced that this is the right way. Whereas I would say it's much more a deeper thing. It's the thing of the Spirit. And when the Spirit convinces you of something, you are very convinced. There's no doubt in your mind as to the truth, capital T truth. And you are brought into the experience of God. So it's not a truth that's just in your intellect, but you actually experience it. You see it on a deeper level. You see your state in a different level. You see and you know and experience the presence of God on a deeper level. It's not just an intellectual theory that you think, oh, this is truth, so I'll follow this way better because it's a better way. It's a better denomination to belong to. I don't think it's like that at all. It has to come from God. And it's so deep that your whole foundation has now been changed off of your ego self and onto the Spirit of God. And so, yeah, even the whole world looks different when you're walking in the Spirit of God instead of your own power, your own intellect, your own self-governance, your own emotions and desires. It's really a transformation of the whole inner being back to that ethic of the infinite love of God and his desires and his governance and his the mind of Christ and the heart of God, which is pure love. Repeating myself, a transformation of the whole inner being of the human being, off of where it was and onto the things of God.
Let's hear from Bev.
I found that very helpful. Just thinking of my own experiences when I was in India, for me, it turned into a cult experience, although it was not a cult. It was an ashram, and local people attended, and the guru was a very wonderful teacher. But my experience was of going through this thing that's been researched, and I looked into it a lot afterwards, is a complete switch of the mind. It's called snapping. And I remember when that happened, the moment it happened. And then when I came back to Canada and I was deprogrammed, and I remember the snapping that went on. And I can't explain what that is, but it's your whole world perspective. As someone explained it, it's like opening up your head and putting a mixer in. And what I realize now, because I'm learning every day what that was about, is that was a mind thing, a perspective on the world at that level of mind and body. It was this, there were spiritual things going on, but it was separate from this change of perspective on the world. And the only thing I can describe it, if no one's experienced it, is that, you know, I'm raised in a certain culture. So that is culture, is the cult that I grew up in. Then I went through this other experience and it completely switched. And then I switched back. And what happened was I could not very easily walk down the street and accept that a green light meant a green light and that I could cross the road, because this is all conceptual, that people stop at a red light. It's just accepting the cultural norm. And to me, it was not real. So I didn't trust a green light as opposed to a red light, because it's all in the mind of the people. I don't know if that helps, but the changes that I go through now are at a much deeper level and don't have to do with the mind. They have to do with the heart. And they don't change. The world perspective changes, but not because of the mind. I have a very hard time explaining, but it's what Chad was talking about in my own experience. And I guess that's, I think it's just quite wonderful, because Fox, from my understanding, is explaining in ordinary English what he did, but hearing him is very different, I think, and we don't have that understanding. If we were to listen to a teacher nowadays, we'd have that perspective that what he's saying is coming from a very deep place, and that very deep place in us can relate to that, can be with that, and that changes us in a very deep way.
Jenny?
Thank you so much for that wonderful analogy of opening up the mind and having everything mixed up. I don't understand the parable of, or the healing story of the lame man who was brought to Jesus. And it was so crowded, his friends couldn't bring him. So they cut a hole in the roof and they lowered him down. And I don't know why I've always been fascinated by that, but I think it has something to do with opening the mind and getting to a deeper level. So I appreciate your sharing that experience of it actually happening. Thank you.
I've been in some meetings and there's some people who identify as Christian. But I wonder if it's just man-made programming, religious programming, because they seem kind of harsh and not like Jesus of my experience. And so there's a difference between doctrine, dogma, how we've been programmed by our religion or by our culture, and something that comes up from the Spirit. And it's the stuff that comes up from the Spirit has life, and there's compassion, and there's kindness, and there's gentleness. And the things that comes from darkness, dogma, sorry, and doctrine, they're more kind of harsh. And they're judgmental, and they're condemning, and they're sometimes self-righteous. And I find the ethic of Jesus is not like that. He's not like that with his interaction with me. And so there's this thing that goes on when people are speaking the right words, but do they possess the life of them? Is the Spirit of God in them showing them and giving them the Spirit's life? Or are they coming from just this programming, this mental programming, purely intellectual and very rule orientated? Sometimes you have to stay between these bounds. Whereas the ethic of God is love. And Jesus said all the law and all the prophets are summed up in love. And whenever there was a dispute between him and the Pharisees, the Pharisees were concerned about the rules and being holy by following the rules. And Jesus was concerned about being holy by being loving to his fellow human being. It's a very different ethic and results in very different fruit as well in the receiver. I said it before, our whole existence, we were made in love and by love for love. That we would gain the heart of God for ourselves and for each other. And if the whole world lived in that ethic of God's love for ourselves and each other, it'd be I couldn't imagine, I can't imagine the place, it'd be very different. David?
Well, this may be a little bit trivial, following on the depths of what you have just shared, Chad, which I want to continue to hold on to and ponder. I'm just going back to wanting a little clarification in the text and about the second sentence. After the meeting was done, the pastor with a rapier in his hand came and asked me what must be done, being a high notionist and a flashy man. Do we have a sense of what it was to be a high notionist and what flashy might have been at that time? I know that Fox preached against notions, which were conjectural, overly intellectual. It's just not entirely clear to me. I know that this description is not a favorable one, but if others have an insight into the language and the usage, that would be helpful. Notionist and flashy.
Go ahead, Michelle.
Thanks. I looked that up about being a high notionist, and it's a person whose religious opinions are characterized by extravagance. So I would say that's kind of like flamboyant and exaggerated in a way. So that's what I understand to be a high notionist.
Are you speaking to the definition of notionist, Elise?
Yes.
Or a different topic?
Not that, no.
Okay. So yeah, notionist for me is someone who's very much in his head about the doctrine, but he doesn't possess the reality of the spirit of the experience of it. So he's all in his head. He's got very high notions, and he thinks very highly of himself too, that he has God all figured out. And none of us do, because God is so infinite, our minds cannot even hold on to the full conception of the fullness of God. Not that it's a bad thing to try, that he's infinite love. I always have to put the word infinite in when I think about the attributes of God. And every attribute in every dimension is infinite. And so if we're left with just the concept of who God is, that's not who God is. A picture of somebody is not who they are. It represents them. It might be a very good indication of something about them, about how they look, but their heart, their feelings, how they interact with the world is much more three-dimensional, and it's who they really are, their heart. You aren't even what you look like, your heart is not necessarily represented in your looks. And so if you just went by the picture of somebody and that's who they are, that would be a very false and very limited way of thinking about that person. But if you know the person, you could be reading their words in a letter, on an email and stuff, and you hear the intonation and the timing of the words and the heart behind them because you know them so well. So a notionist is stuck in the ideas of something, the doctrines, and they have a very high, usually they have a very high view of their ideas. But when you experience God, you're humbled in such a way that he blows away all your expectations, especially in how loving and kind and gentle he is, compassionate and so on. And he's infinitely those things. And so every time you encounter God after some time of not experiencing him, you are blown away again. And so the idea, the doctrines about God can never reach the infinitude of who he is in any dimension. So for me, that's what a notionist is. Elise? Oh,
Sorry. So this is back to, and I was trying to figure out how to raise my hand, or I would have raised it at a time that was more in keeping with where we are. The same passage, but about convincement. And this is the part, and I'll read this. I was moved of a sudden to tell him that which he spoke in him was to be damned, which stopped the pastor's mouth, and the witness of God was raised up in him. And I opened to him the state of election and reprobation, so that he said he never heard the like in his life. He also came afterward to be convinced. So, Roxy, I'm in the meeting, honey. Sorry. Let's see. Gosh. So what George Fox spoke this truth to this pastor, and what heard that truth was the witness of God in him. We modern friends often speak of everyone has that of God within them, and therefore this is why we respect them or we treat them in a certain way. Well, yes, we need to respect and treat people with respect no matter what. But that is not that of God within them. That's them. That is them, their created person. But there is within each person that of God which hears the truth. And that is, I'm sorry, just come on here to say something.
Speak of the word flashy. That seems quite a modern word to me. That doesn't seem very archaic. You know, look at him with the flash car, or, you know, it's kind of like, so I don't know if that word's changed a great deal since 1653 to 2023.
A lot of words have, unfortunately, and so they're called, some people call them false friends, because you think you know the meaning of the word, but it's used very differently back then. So if anyone wants to look it up in Johnson's dictionary, they can. It's a much closer source of definition of the time. Elise, are you ready to continue? You don't have to.
I hope that I am. I can't seem to answer the phone and tell my friend that I'm in a meeting. And this really fits in with what Chad said, and another friend also, that which is touched is that of God within the person, which is not that person. That is not their natural state. That is something that is separate from them, that is God within them. And that was raised up in this preacher, and he was stunned by it. And this was the opening that convinced him, and I'm not going to hang up.
So looking that word up in Johnson's dictionary, we put in the chat. Second definition means insipid, without force or spirit. And sometimes we get that idea when we use the word flashy these days, but that's not usually our primary definition of it, right? Empty, without substance. Bev, go ahead.
For me, I see Fox talking about different people that he's come into contact with, you know, the harlot or the wicked women or the magistrate. They're all displaying a different way of being. And when Elaine used natural state, I always think of that as being what we were born with before we were cultivated and developed all this mind stuff. And it's almost like Fox is able, at that moment, he said, I was moved of a sudden. It's like it came through him to communicate with this man from that deeper place, that it would hit home in this other man, in spite of all this other stuff going there. And because it was coming from this deeper divine place, it affected him. I don't even think it's the words, it's that it's like putting the light into the other person and they are open to it. He says, and I opened to him the state of election and reprobation. I have no idea what that means, but it's like what came through Fox to this person hit in that natural state, that real, who he really was, and he could feel it. And he said he never heard the like in his life. Like when Fox is having this come through him, it's not like having a conversation. It's this very special way of touching a person in a deeper way, which, you know, even in meetings, when someone has a leading, it touches me in a very deep place, and I'm transformed by it. And I just think we keep getting these images from Fox of what he's doing and what the way is. And it's quite wonderful.
Let's hear from David.
Well, again, I think that what I'm going to share is of much less importance than what Bev just said. It feels anticlimactic to me, but this phrase of election and reprobation, these were kind of standard dynamics with which the Calvinists were preaching and, you know, worrying people that you never could be sure of whether you were in among the elect or those who were eternally condemned. So, you know, it's a terrible way to live. And this was a major ongoing conflict between that aspect of actually Protestantism, the Calvinists, and the Quakers. So I'm sure there's been a lot of research and writing on that particular conflict, and it's just referred to in passing. And the important thing is this man is hearing something he never heard before, and came to be convinced because of the witness of God, taking him far beyond what people thought was essential in their religious life, of worrying about whether they were predestined to be saved or not.
Having come from that background myself, I can speak to it, yes. And they would say that you cannot do anything about it. You have no recourse. You cannot even approach God because it's all in God's hands, and he has chosen some to be condemned forever. And there's nothing you can do about it. And as David said, maybe sometimes you can't even know whether you are in the approved group or not. But all your actions or inactions would have no effect on God's heart. Whereas the other friends were saying, no, you can know God. He lives within you. You can know him. You can experience him. He can show you your state, and he can transform you. Seesaw my he's, if that's not your tradition. That is my tradition, so that's how I speak, sorry. And so those people that were under that Calvinism had no hope, and they had no agency. And the friends are always saying, no, every single person can know God. Every single person can experience him because he lives within you. He's part of you. The seed is within you. And so they were always, speaking maybe to what Bev was saying earlier about Fox always endeavored to speak from the life of God within him to the life of God within the hearers, to the seed of God within them. And countless times in his epistles and his letters that we've brought up, he's saying, stay low in the spirit and stay back in the spirit and only speak forth what God gives you to speak, and only move forth when God tells you to move forward and say something. And otherwise, stay low in the spirit yourself and preserve yourself in the spirit of God and what the spirit of God provides you. Because it's just far too easily when we're in speaking to people or we're in a debate to get up in our own flesh and argue our own points and want to be right and want to, this is the truth and you're all wrong. And that's not the Spirit of God. And so when the Spirit of God speaks, it's to produce life in the hearer. It might be to bring something wrong down, but the ultimate end is to bring life to the hearer and connect that hearer with that life within them. And so it's not our job to convince people, that's the Spirit's job. Our job is just to speak and say and do what we're led by the Spirit to speak and say and do, and not to add to it or subtract from it in fear. And hopefully the Spirit empowers us to be brave to do that. Even speaking the truth to power, which is sometimes quite necessary to right something that's going wrong in the world. And so it's not his own wisdom that he's moved by God, right, to say that this is what must be condemned, is what is moving this pastor with the rapier to say to him. And it's always quite interesting, the contrast between the Quakers who are moved by the Spirit of life and those who are opposing them in the spirit of religion. I'll say the spirit of religion doesn't think anything about beating and killing and crucifying what the Spirit is doing through that person. They feel justified by to use any means whatsoever, lie, cheat, steal, kill, beat, persecute. They feel quite justified in propping up what they think is the right way against what the person moving in the Spirit, the prophet, says. And so Jesus says to even the Israelites back then, your forefathers killed all the prophets, and you're sons of those killers. And eventually they did get their way and have Jesus crucified, which he said he could call legions of angels to fight for him if war was his way. But instead he allowed himself to be tortured to death and persecuted. And so you see the contrast between the war spirit of religion and I'm right and you have to do things my way and control. And you see the contrast of Jesus laying down his life. Now you see the contrast here of Fox, allows himself to be beaten several times and jailed and persecuted in various different ways. But he seeks the power from God within him to be brave and do exactly what the Spirit is leading him to do, which is from the life of God within him and speaking to the life of God within the hearers, with the aim of letting them hear that life within themselves and become followers of that life themselves. So he's not looking for converts to be followers of George Fox. He's looking for people to be convinced by the Spirit and become followers of the Spirit. Bev?
I just want, well, especially David to know that I have never heard anything trivial here. I feel it's a very deep space that we're in. And I've always felt that people are talking from their heart. And anything that has been spoken here has always touched me. So I guess I believe that each of us, I don't know why I often feel like crying when I'm here, but it's not sadness or happiness. It's just this very deep sense of gratitude for this space. And I'm sure that that's what people felt around Fox, because it comes through everyone. He was showing the way, just like Yeshua showed the way. And I think we're always trying to conceptualize or do it with our mind. And we're led by people like Fox to go to a deeper place, like the Aramaic of Jesus was. There was no mind, there was only the heart, and mind was thoughts on the heart. And I feel very privileged to be in a space where the concept of a wound, which is what Yeshua in Aramaic called the divine, is an action, not a thing. And in indigenous ways, which Aramaic was, it's like quantum. It's not having an image of the divine. It's this energy. It's the love and the light coming through. And I find for myself, if I have no image, if I just feel the energy, then it's a more realistic way. It gives me the ability to absorb it. If I can get away from the thinking mind, which is what our society wants us to be in. I really don't know what I'm saying, but there is nothing ever trivial that I've heard here. And I so thank you for sharing.
Over to David. Thank you, Bev.
I guess the two times that I said that what I wanted to offer was trivial was that I was just going to look at a couple of words. And yet I fully share that sense that Bev has, that everything that comes forth is being blessed. And we may hear different aspects of it related to our own experience, but this is the beloved community, and everything counts. The tearful and authentic testimony from Bev means a great deal to me.
I do want to share something, which maybe especially for Bev, but maybe something we all need to hear, which is it's not my understanding that George Fox was trying to get people to become Quakers. George Fox was turning people to Christ within them, to turn to Christ, to be open, to be transformed, to see oneself more clearly, which can be very painful, and to give over to that, to the Christ within them. And this is not at all the same thing as becoming a Quaker. And those two things do not always exist together. And being aware and being turned over toward Christ is something you have to look for. I mean, it isn't always where you think. And where you think it isn't always there. So it's just a name. You know, being a Quaker is a name. There's something real that is not that. That is where George Fox was going, and where his power and energy came from. It wasn't him, but something flowed through him and compelled him to go out and tell people, look, there's something that is, you have access to you within yourself. Something I've just realized recently, which was a little bit shocking. Thanks.
Lisa, I'm glad that you said the phrase where it comes from. And that's pretty much equivalent to a phrase of a friend I've gotten to know in New York yearly meeting, Don Badgley. He's always talking about the source with a capital S. And it's similar to, you know, the root, the well, which is upspringing. In a gentle and yet incisive way, he has a critique against reducing the message of the Society of Friends to so-called spices. Simplicity, peace, integrity, community, equality, sustainability. Those are the fruits, not the root. So if we only look at these external aspects of our public witness and what we're known for, it's really truncated. It's not being as faithful as we could be. And we could even say the harsh words of hiding a light under a bushel. Just being kind of self-satisfied. Yeah, we got it right. We're respectable people. We're comfortable with each other. We want to be welcoming. We want everybody to be comfortable. Don't want to upset anything. So look at all these nice virtues we have. And yet that isn't what we're reading about in this journal. And that isn't what was happening in those first 50 years or so. So thank you, Elise, for that, pointing to where it comes from. The source.
The infinite source. The people always ask me, how do you know?
It's all about, oops, it's all the practice. It's not about belief, because that's the mind. The practice is in here. And it's going on all over the world and always has through all different cultures. And we're just doing what a whole bunch of other people are doing around the world. And hopefully we will all grow to that place where we can transform our societies too. Because it's not just about ourselves, it's about all of society, all of them.
Yeah, it's all these metaphors for God are always in motion. So it's the stream, it's the ocean, it's the life, it's the lights, you know, lights in motion, right? It's always not just an idea, an intellectual idea. It's the flow of God from within. It's a fountain, you know, there's another scriptural thing which I love. The fountain of life, fountaining out from our deepest being. And when we're living in accordance with that, it's God doing it. It's not us trying to do it. It's not our self-effort so much, I find. My self-effort doesn't produce very much good, even when I'm trying to be kind and patient. And it doesn't really produce infinite kindness and patience. And there's always a big limit, a hard stop somewhere where I explode into the opposite. But when I'm living from the life of God, he's producing his righteousness, his goodness, his love, his kindness, his patience from within me. I'm just being carried along by the river and the ocean and the stream and the fountain. And then he produces his infinite patience, you know. I'm not trying hard to produce it. I'm not trying, as David liked last time, I'm not trying to wrestle my heart into loving people. I'm letting God flow through me, right? I'm letting his love flow through me. And it's a hugely different ethic and produces much better results when he's doing it. And I'm along resting in his production, his righteousness, right? His love, his kindness, you know.
I'm going to lay something on you, which another group of friends is used to me doing, and that's sharing a song. And it is prompted by both the second screen of Shadows, which is Galatians 5, and also what he says about letting it flow. So this is one of my bicycle songs. As I ride along in the countryside, sometimes there's a rhythm and it starts flowing up into a, forming up into a song. And the origins of this is that I wanted to memorize what were those 9 fruits of the Spirit. And music is a powerful prompt to the memory. So this is a very simple tune, 2 little stanzas. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, and gentleness, and also self-control. These are fruits of God's Spirit. We do not create them, but we can let them flow through us. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, and gentleness, and also self-control. Amen.